All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. I'm George McNair. This is State of the Braves, and I'm really excited to bring this special episode of State of the Braves to you as we are talking all things Shohei Ohtani. And of course, he is one of the most unique free agents to probably ever hit the free agent market in baseball history. I'm sure a ton of teams are hoping to bring Shohei to them. Of course, some teams have a more realistic opportunity than others. I don't know that anyone would call the Braves a favorite to land Shohei Ohtani. Most lists out there you see from supposed experts are not going to include the Braves. But there was a report uh, in the middle of last week that came out that got a lot of Braves fans excited, and that was, I believe, from John Morosi. And the report was that Shohei Ohtani is intrigued about playing for the Braves. Intrigued, right? So that's going to get a lot of Braves fans, especially on social media, all a buzz, all a flutter, just thinking about the opportunity, the possibilities, right? The possibilities of Shohei Ohtani coming to the Atlanta Braves. Of course, already a historic offense, and then adding Ohtani to that mix, and then also adding him eventually to the pitching staff as well, right? So it is very fun to think about, and honestly, that's the attitude I'm taking on this episode. Is let's just have fun and let's imagine the possibilities. I do want to take a realistic approach, a thoughtful approach about what might bring Ohtani to the Braves, and it's definitely going to be a different mindset than the common thinking of the top teams that Ohtani is going to target. So, some think that this report about Ohtani being intrigued about playing for the Braves is only posturing by Ohtani's camp. I've heard several different people mention that posturing for more money. I don't really think that is true. I got a few reasons for that. First, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense of why he would use the Braves to do that. Most don't see the Braves as the highest bidder for Ohtani anyways. Again, they're not on the top list for Ohtani. Everybody knows that while the Braves are willing to spend money, they don't typically throw millions upon millions of dollars to free agents. So it doesn't really make sense to me that he would try to use the Braves for those purposes. I think he would use the Yankees or the Dodgers or maybe a couple other teams fit into that camp. Second, Ohtani isn't really known to be a guy who's interested in posturing or playing games. He's known as being very straight-laced, very serious, very just matter of fact and getting down to business. So maybe his agent would be willing to do that, but I think his agent is actually kind of known for being the same type of guy. So I think he's going to be very straightforward and quiet in these negotiations. I don't foresee them leaking any kind of posturing out to the media. Now, third, I do think it makes perfect sense that Ohtani would be intrigued about playing for the Braves. I just, from the beginning of him visiting Truist Park 2 years ago, I felt like Ohtani was a Braves fit just in the fact that how he goes about his business, the type of player and person he is, and that this playing for the Braves. Now, even at the time, I thought it was kind of a distant dream, right? But just that idea seemed to make sense. Like he kind of fits as a Brave and how he likes to go about things. And of course, the Braves are synonymous with winning, and anybody can foresee that they probably have the best chance to win for a long time in baseball, and I really think Ohtani is about winning. So it makes perfect sense to me that Ohtani would be intrigued about playing for the Braves. Now, one additional note before I get deeper into this episode. I think it is likely that Ohtani will sign fairly soon. He did not drag out his first contract negotiations when he signed with the Angels. Of course, he also visited several other teams at that time, but he made it quick, and there were no press releases or leaks. I would say before he signed. It just happened, and it was the Angels. And he's, like I said, he's thought to be a guy who wants to get down to business, get into a team's facilities, and just get to work. As he wants to continue to be one of the best players in the history of baseball. So I foresee that happening, And that's one reason why I wanted to go ahead and get this episode out before Thanksgiving. And by the way, wishing all of you guys a happy Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite holidays. I love it. I love eating, but also love being around family. And I think it's just really important to be thoughtful about what we all should be thankful for. So anyways, happy Thanksgiving out there, everybody. But let's get back to talking about Shohei Ohtani, right? So let me try to come up with a realistic Ohtani scenario coming to the Braves. And then after that, I'm going to break down who I think the actual favorites might be to land Ohtani. It's going to be pretty different from what you're hearing out there in the media. So I think the Braves would offer Ohtani somewhere. I'm going to give you a range, right? That they would offer him somewhere in the 8-year, $320 to $360 million range. Now that's definitely going to be low, right? It's going to be low compared to what other teams would offer. Us Braves fans, we come to expect that with the Braves and how they negotiate free agent contracts. They're all about value. I don't care who the player is. They're not going to lose their minds and say, we have to sign this person. They're always willing to walk away from the table. Of course, when I say they, I particularly mean Alex Anthopoulos. We know that was true with the Freddie Freeman negotiations. They never really entered into Dansby Swanson negotiations that we can tell, because I think the market went crazy for Dansby. So anyways, this is what something in this range I think is what they would offer Ohtani. So that's around the 40 to 42, 43, $44 million per year, I think is where they would be. But probably the biggest key to this contract offer is it's only for 8 years. A lot of people think Ohtani is going to get between 10 and 12 years from some team. I think this would also be kind of an escalating type of contract where he's not making quite as much in the early years. You've seen the Braves do that type of contract with a lot of their star players. And it would kind of make sense since Ohtani will not be pitching in year one with whatever team he signs with. This would take him from his year 29, his 29 age year, which is he is 29 right now, through age 37. Of course, a team who wants to sign him for 4 more years is signing him into his early 40s. And I think the Braves have no interest in that. So, obviously signing Ohtani would mean that you would have to trade Marcell Ozuna, as you would bring Ohtani in as your primary DH, very obviously. And Ozuna is not going to go out into left field again, I don't think. So Ozuna is also making $18 million. So this would be a salary dump and a shifting of some of your payroll. And I think there are some teams out there, I've talked about this previously, that would be very willing to take on Ozuna for one, or he does have a team option for an additional year. I think there are teams out there who would be very interested in taking that on, even though Ozuna's had some off-the-field issues. I think he's probably removed enough for some teams to be interested. I think this would also, signing Ohtani would also likely guarantee that you would not bring back Max Fried for the 2024 season. I think that actually may already be the case, but if it's not the case right now, I think if you brought in Ohtani for these numbers and the idea that he would be pitching in 2025 and beyond, Max Fried would probably, be one step out the door. You would gain Ohtani back as a pitcher in 2025, and that is really important to the fact that he actually fits pretty well with what the Braves want to do long term. Of course, potentially losing Fried and Charlie Morton after this season, and I've been advocating this the entire offseason so far, but putting Vaughn Grissom in left field would be another way to have a cheap option in left field when you're putting so much money into signing a Shohei Ohtani. So again, projections for Ohtani are closer to 12 years and $500+ million a year. So that's somewhere between, again, it's like $42 to $44 million a year, but over 12 years. And that is a ton of money, guys. Teams, I guarantee you there's some teams out there willing to do this, but the Braves will pay no one, I don't care who they are, they will pay no one $40+ million a year into their late 30s and early 40s. Ohtani is a pretty unique guy, though, right? he could make up a lot of this money in endorsements and value to the club. But, if he's leaving money on the table, that's the biggest part for him, right? If he's leaving money on the table, him making up some of this money in endorsements is a reality. It kind of reminds me of when LeBron James started shopping for teams. Just the idea that, of course, they make $50+ million in the NBA. And not even the best players in the NBA make that. Puts that into perspective a little bit. But, the idea is that LeBron is making so much in endorsements that the salary he's making on the back end actually playing basketball is secondary. And I don't know if it's quite that extreme for a baseball player like Ohtani, but those endorsement deals are very real for him. So it's just something to keep in mind. The other thing when I think about could Ohtani take less from a team like the Braves, I just, of course, we don't know his attitude and his priorities. And that's what I'm going to get to a little bit more in this episode. But if he's not prioritizing money as his number one priority, right, then, how does his life change by making $350 million a year compared to $500 million a year, right? I mean, you get to a point where you're making so much money, it just becomes almost not real. And so some guys, they're going to prioritize money above everything else, and that is their prerogative to do so, right? We just don't know where Ohtani's priorities lie. He's a quiet guy. He's known to be that. And so anyone out there who says this is exactly how Ohtani thinks and this is where he's going is probably, they're probably selling you something, right? So that's not what I'm trying to do. Okay. I am in my own way kind of guessing where Ohtani's priorities lie, but I'm just giving you one potential direction that I think he could go. And I am reading in some things that, there are some hints and clues about who Ohtani is since his time with the Angels. So I don't think I'm going off of nothing, but I'm also assuming that there's probably a lot I don't know, and I could be totally off on how Ohtani is handling his free agency. So again, the question is, what does Ohtani value the most? And I've come up with a few different categories that I wanted to consider. The very first category is opportunity to win year in and year out. So whatever team you go to, are you going to win? Are you going to be able to win immediately? And is it a pretty good guarantee that that team is going to sustain success for a long period of time? Of course, Braves fans know that we can say yes to that. Not every team can, but there are some teams out there who can. And so, again, I'm going to dive into this in a minute. Media, fan base, and spotlight is my next category, right? What teams have like tons of media pressure on them or kind of a negative pressure-filled fan base? Where's the spotlight heavier? There's some locations where you're going to have to deal with more paparazzi and just people following you around. And there's other places that aren't as intense as that. And we know that typically, or not typically, but we do know that Ohtani is not a huge fan of that type of like really intense spotlight. The next area, healthy team environment. So this would include a really good coaching staff that he can rely on and trust, and teammates around him that are going to encourage him to, and help him be the best player he can be. I think he really does care about being one of, if not the greatest baseball player ever. And I think that is actually possible for him. And I think he cares about, not just in a selfish way, but, it does drive him. But again, he wants to win at the same time. Okay, the next category, quality of front office. And that's kind of straightforward. He's coming from the Angels, who, sorry Angels, but it is kind of known that they have had their struggles with front office, with the owner, and that sort of thing. So I'm sure Ohtani is looking for a little more stability there. And then the last two categories, again, are a little bit more of question marks. Money, how much is he leaning into money being one of the more important things, and geography. And it has been reported that he cares much less this time around as to just the geography of where he lands A lot of Japanese pitchers, as they're just coming to America for the first time, will sound the West Coast. But, Otani's been in the league multiple years now. He's played in every ballpark, and he probably has a little better feel for where he would want to be and where he would not want to be. So Ohtani and his camp are very tight-lipped, um, and they mean to be that way. But a few things again have been reported about his priorities, and we take these with a grain of salt. Maybe some of them are reported and just aren't true, and maybe some of them are. So I recognize that to begin with here. But my general take is that Ohtani wants to win, right? He wants a team that will help him be the greatest player he can be. And he wants to do so while not living under like super intense media spotlight with like big market pressures. I don't think he's interested in constant paparazzi and being chased around everywhere, and wants to live a somewhat normal life. He comes across that way. He's obviously generally a very private guy. He's not a, hey, look at me, I want all the spotlight type of star. He's really kind of the opposite of that. Um, and so I also think he's interested in a positive, healthy team environment and a competent front office. I'm not sure he had those, particularly the latter one in Los Angeles. So again, I also think money is probably slightly less important to him. I'm guessing on that one, but this is just kind of the vibe I get from him. And again, part of that too is he's going to have plenty of opportunities to make all the money he could ever want in a lot of different ways that maybe some other players don't have that opportunity. So I just mean that money's maybe not the chief factor. It's important, but maybe not the chief factor to him. And then again, geography, it sounds like maybe matters a little less to him now. All right. So with all that in mind, guys, I'm going to share with you, and this is something new I've never done on this podcast. So we're relying on my technology abilities, which is a little scary, but I'm going to do my best here to show you my breakdown through a table and these series of categories that I've already laid out for you, right? And what you're going to see is how I am. Not every category is equal, right? Some priorities are higher and some are lower. And again, this is just a guess, maybe an educated guess, but I'm leaning into the ideas that I've already shared with you with how Ohtani might view these different priorities in picking his next team. All right, guys. So here we go. Okay, we have I've created a chart here that I hope will help walk through some of my thinking on Ohtani and where he might land. And I'll just say ahead of time that I really tried to do this as blindly as possible. Obviously, being a big Braves fan, I am unapologetically biased. I try my best and probably don't succeed all the time, but I try my best to be as fair as I can be, and especially with each of these categories. So obviously, another fan, another person might look at these categories and judge each of these teams differently than I'm judging them. So this is just my take. And again, if you disagree with me, leave some thoughts in the comments section. Hopefully some of this is, hopefully we have some agreement on this. Okay. So let's start, right? The very first tier, I'm going to break this into 4 tiers. As you can see, tier 4 are teams that have little chance of landing Shohei Ohtani. And I think I have a total of 13 teams that we're going to talk about. And the first is the Red Sox. So the Red Sox, of course, have money, right? They, with some of the other big market teams, certainly lean into that, and it benefits them a lot. But here's the problem. I think a lot of areas in which Shohei cares more about are not strong for the Red Sox. Now, when through the entire length of the contract, I might have been a little tough on the Red Sox here, but the fact is they've been very much up and down over the last several years. I mean, they have some great players. They have Rafael Devers, but I don't know that overall their roster is one that really would bring a lot of confidence to Ohtani that they're going to consistently win while he's there. It almost would feel like he's just jumping into another Angels type of situation. Their front office has been in upheaval. They recently hired someone new to be their GM. Of course, there's a lot of media and fan pressure playing in Boston. So all of this combined, I think Boston is actually pretty low on the list. The next is the Mets, and the Mets are very similar to this. Of course, they have as much money to burn as they want to with their new owner, but with recently trading DeGrom and Scherzer, there's talk that that several of their other key pieces might be traded this offseason. It just doesn't seem like, at least in the immediate, that they are in win now mode. I think it's just true they're not going to be winning over the next probably 2 years, and I don't think Ohtani wants to waste 2 years before they start winning. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that will take them off the table, even though they're going to be able to throw probably countless amounts of money at Ohtani. But again, of course, media pressure, fan base pressure in the New York media. I don't think Ohtani wants any part of that, quite honestly. All right, the Padres. The Padres are kind of a different thing altogether, right? Very sadly, their owner just passed away, and he was a guy that was very much willing to spend money. Maybe sometimes even spend to the point the Padres weren't really making money. But he cared about his team, right? And you do appreciate that as a fan, that your owner would be willing to go for it. So that being said, they might be in a situation where whoever comes in next is not willing or able to spend that kind of money. Now, the Padres playing in San Diego, it's a pretty pressure-free environment. It's a smaller market. I guess if I'd put a weather category up here, the Padres would get more points. But other than that, right, I don't foresee them being strong in any of these other areas. There's been talk that they might have to trade Soto, and their pitching staff is a little questionable. Blake Snell is a free agent, so I don't foresee Ohtani putting the Padres high on his list. All right, and the final one might be a little bit of a surprise to some of you guys, but it's the Yankees in Tier 4. I mean, they are the highest in Tier 4. They almost made it to Tier 3, but again, they didn't make the playoffs this past year. They made it in years past, so maybe they're not too far behind that. It is crazy to think about Shohei Ohtani hitting in Yankee Stadium with that short porch and in the same lineup as Aaron Judge, but there's still a lot of question marks with the Yankees' overall roster. Again, I think Ohtani playing in New York is probably not something he wants to do. The coaching staff, Aaron Boone may or may not be there much longer. And then the front office, I don't know if you've been following, guys, but Brian Cashman has been made some odd statements. There's some back and forth between him and Giancarlo Stanton. And I guarantee you Ohtani is paying attention to that. And so I think that's a big negative that might not have even existed before the offseason happened. So I'm saying that the Yankees are not going to bring in Ohtani. All right, let's go on to Tier 4. All right, so Tier 4, actually the Angels do make Tier 4. I don't think he's coming back to the Angels. It's just kind of been there, done that. And he obviously knows very much the weaknesses. And that first column, right, the fact that they're not ready to win. I mean, they've proven that they aren't capable of winning with him. So, what are they going to do new to turn that around? So I think he's going to move on. But it is interesting that the Angels scored a little higher here, and maybe it's one of the reasons why he chose them to begin with. I mean, most people haven't really talked about that. I mean, Ohtani had plenty of choices when he came into the majors the very first time, and he chose the Angels. And that wasn't a very obvious choice. And so that intrigues me, the fact that he did that. So they're still kind of high here. But again, I think he's learned that the front office with an owner that makes some kind of strange decisions sometimes is probably not where he wants to be. I did give them some points for coaching for Ron Washington. I want to make sure that is noted. I do think that he brings a gravitas to the coaching staff that maybe didn't exist this past season with the Angels, but nonetheless, they are in Tier 3, but they are still pretty low. The Blue Jays actually tied that total with the Angels in different ways. I think they're more of a win now team, though. They've been in and out of the playoffs the last few years. They have a pretty good young core with some decent pitching, so that's why I gave them some points there. Playing in Toronto would probably be pretty low key. And coaching and team environment, I don't know that it's bad. I mean, I don't know that it's also known to be the absolute best environment in baseball. Um, and again, I don't think they're going to be able to throw all that much money at Ohtani, but neither the Braves. So there they are, kind of in the middle of the pack. And then I have the Cubs at the top of Tier 3. You might have noticed that a lot of people have been mentioning the Cubs as a possibility for Ohtani. I think that is true. Tier 3 I'm calling dark horses, so that means they do have a chance. It wouldn't shock me beyond all measure that one of these teams stepped up and signed Ohtani. With the Cubs, I think they're kind of in the middle ground of pretty much all of these categories, except they do have money, right? They have money that they might be willing to spend and throw at Ohtani. They just missed the playoffs this year. There is some media pressure that's unique to Chicago and being a part of the Cubs, but not as bad as New York or Boston. The coaching and team environment is interesting because of this recent change to get rid of David Ross and go with Craig Counsell. I wonder how Ohtani might view that, if he would view it positively, if he really thinks highly of Counsell, or if he might view it negatively, is how they dealt with David Ross. So that's Tier 3. All right, on to Tier 2, and I would call this tier teams that are in the hunt for Ohtani. And the Phillies are at the bottom of Tier 2. So I think they are legitimate. I also saw just today that the Phillies have re-signed Aaron Nola. So that contract is worth a lot of money, and I won't get into the specifics of that today. I'll probably talk about it in my next episode. But the Phillies are putting a lot back into their rotation. But the Phillies have a lot of money to spend as well. I do think the media pressure and the fan base would be considered a negative to Ohtani. It's one of those Northeastern intense fan bases with maybe not the intensity of media as New York, but I still think it would be considered a negative to Ohtani. The others, however, the other areas are pretty positive for Philadelphia. They're obviously in win now mode. I do think there are some questions long term with Philly, but because they have so much money and they have a couple really great stars locked up long term, in Nola and Harper, and a couple other guys, I think Ohtani would consider them set up well to win for a long time. Generally speaking, I think the Phillies are in a good place if they wanted to go after Ohtani. I have not heard that they are particularly aggressive in that area of going for Ohtani, but who knows? Now, the Mariners, I have to mention this ahead of time. They're in my Tier 2, but it came out just yesterday that they are basically out of the hunt for Ohtani. Now, what that means, I'm not sure. I kind of read between the lines that they probably met with Ohtani and it's just not going to happen, which is interesting of itself. I mean, obviously he's actively meeting with teams right now. I would certainly assume that. But again, we don't know specifics. So I had the Mariners in the hunt. I think a lot of people thought that the Mariners might be a landing spot for Ohtani, but it just looks like it's not going to happen. But you can see my breakdown here. I think generally the Mariners are in win now mode. Seattle would be a good place to play generally, right? The Mariners obviously not going to land Ohtani, but they did fit into this area for me. All right, and then the top of Tier 2 is the Giants, and I could absolutely see Ohtani going to San Francisco. I think they're uniquely, let's say, desperate for a star to come to them. You might remember that they lost out on Carlos Correa with that whole injury saga that he had before he finally landed back in Minnesota. But there's been quite a few high-level stars that they've gone after and have basically finished in second to those other teams that have gotten those stars. So I think they're greatly in need of that. They brought in Bob Melvin as their manager. I think they're trying to change the narrative and change things in San Francisco. So I think it might not be super clear to Ohtani if they are going to win immediately, and that might be a ding against them. But I think everything else is pretty solid in San Francisco. All right, so let's get to tier one. Okay, at the bottom of tier one. So these are my top three teams, and again, obviously, it's based off of how I'm weighting these different categories. So my actually tied for second place team is the Dodgers. So the Dodgers, the only thing that goes against them, and they get high marks in every other category, is media pressure and fan base. And again, this is just the idea that does Shohei Ohtani want to go to LA? Does he want to go to Hollywood? I mean, he was with the LA Angels, but he's really in Anaheim, right? That's very different than being with the Dodgers. The spotlight is very different. And the fan base is very different and expectations. So this one dinged the Dodgers, but everything else, I mean, they're obviously in win now mode. They have a really good coaching staff and team environment. Their front office is top notch. They could throw money at Ohtani like maybe nobody else. Them and maybe the Mets would be at the top of that list. So yeah, I think the Dodgers are very, very real contenders for Ohtani. All right, here we go, Braves fans. My tied for second team is the Braves. And again, I see if you agree with me on these. I mean, I honestly think these left four categories you can't really argue with too much, right? The Braves, more than any other team on this list, I think, are not only in win now mode, but they're in win 5 years from now mode, right? They are set up long term, really through the length of Ohtani's contract to win and play at a high level. And I think he really cares about that. Also, playing in Atlanta is pretty good, right? It's in terms of there are expectations, right? But there's also tremendous fan support, not high media pressure at all, and you're going to be able to play in October constantly. Team environment, coaching environment, really probably second to none. Quality front office, again, probably second to none. And here's the thing, right? It's the money. It's really likely that the Braves are going to, if they offer Ohtani a contract and it gets that far, that it's going to be lower than pretty much every other offer. I mean, I just assume that to be so. So it's just a matter of, is Ohtani looking at these other factors as more important than the money? All right, then my number one team, and this actually kind of surprised me, guys, is the Rangers, who are coming off, of course, a World Series. I think they're very similar to the Braves in a lot of ways. And really the only area that they get the leg up against the Braves is money. So they've spent a lot of money already, and this is a little bit of me guessing. I'm assuming that the Rangers have enough money to spend after this World Series win, but of course they've spent a ton to get a Scherzer, to get a Simeon and a Seager and all those guys. So maybe they don't have that money. Maybe they're kind of tapped out. But if they have the money to spend, I actually think they are a very interesting possibility for Ohtani. So, of course, guys, there are a ton of assumptions I'm making with this breakdown. Maybe Ohtani values the money as much or more than winning or than any of these other priorities, or maybe the reports of him shying away from media attention are overblown. Maybe he is happy to take that on. Maybe the Braves simply have other priorities this offseason and are just going to look to other things that are more realistic. Any of those and all of those things could be true. But Ohtani is just such a unique free agent, and his value is unique. ESPN had an article not too long ago in which they were trying to, they basically speculated that his actual on-field value is somewhere north of $600 million over 12 years. And they were saying, well, of course, no team is actually probably going to be willing to spend that amount. But that's kind of based off of his previous 3 years. That's what he's actually worth. So that's something to be said, and even if he never pitches again, Ohtani is still a top 5 hitter in baseball, right? He's basically, even as just a hitter, he's a Ronald Acuna or a Freddie Freeman or a Mookie Betts, right? He's in that category with those three guys. Um, and so if he never pitches again and you would have to put him in left field or something, he's still a top 3, top 4 player in all of baseball, even without the pitching. So, yeah, he is an incredibly valuable player. If you brought in Ohtani, another thing is it opens up the Japanese market and brings in casual fans around the country, basically to be your fans, right? And some of that would mitigate part of the cost of Ohtani. It's hard to kind of measure how much it would mitigate millions upon millions of dollars of investment, but it certainly is unique to Ohtani compared to a lot of other baseball players out there, right? An Aaron Judge or a Bryce Harper or a Juan Soto does not have that additional market value that a Shohei Ohtani does. Every team is going to probably evaluate and judge that value differently. And so who knows how the Braves view it. But again, I think one thing that could be unique for the Braves, and I mentioned this last episode, is that they're a publicly traded entity, right? And so does this maybe mean more to the Braves, the fact that bringing in Ohtani could increase, stock shares and that sort of thing? It's just a speculation, but I think maybe it could. So, guys, now let's consider the on-the-field impact of Ohtani. It's kind of obvious that he would have tremendous impact to any team he would come to, but let's actually think about it for a second. So if Ohtani came to the Braves, the 2024 lineup would look something like this, and you might want to sit down for this, right? Ronald Acuna batting first, Shohei Ohtani batting second, Austin Riley third, Matt Olson 4, Ozzie Albies 5th, Michael Harris 6th. Your catchers, depending on who's playing, are hitting 7th, Orlando Arcia 8th, and Vaughn Grissom 9th. Now that is a crazy murderer's row lineup right there. And then the 2024 rotation, again, of course, because Ohtani is not going to pitch in 2024, would look something like Fried, Strider, a free agent that hopefully the Braves will bring in, not Aaron Nola anymore, but maybe a Sonny Gray, Charlie Morton 4, Bryce Elder 5, and then you have a couple other guys as a depth, Huascar and Noah coming back from Tommy John, Smith Shawver, and then maybe even Hurston Waldrop later in the year. All right, then the 2025 lineup stays the same. I mean, it's probably just all coming back the same as 2024. You're set for a really long time, honestly, with that lineup. And then 2025 rotation, assuming that Fried and Morton move on, would be Strider, Ohtani, again, maybe Sonny Gray, Smith Shawver, or Hurston Waldrop as your 4. Bryce Elder still is around as your 5. And then don't forget, other than Huascar and Noah, you have Ian Anderson coming back at some point in 2024. So maybe by 2025, who knows, maybe he provides depth, or maybe he steps back in to a rotation spot at that time. But it's just an interesting thing to consider with Ohtani. If Fried and Morton are leaving after 2024 and you have Ohtani waiting in the wings to step into the rotation for 2025, it does make some sense on paper. So signing Ohtani improves what was already a historic offense, and it covers your 2025 rotation without needing to add another starter if and when Fried and Morton go. If Ohtani can't pitch in 2025, then again, maybe an Ian Anderson or a Huascar and Noah step up, and you cover it that way. You might be a little more cash strapped, right, if you sign Ohtani, and that, of course, is something that the Braves will have to weigh. Basically, in 2025, Ohtani will replace. By 2025, Ohtani will have replaced Ozuna and Fried, right? Again, Ozuna you would have to get rid of if you brought in Ohtani. But that's about $40 million that you're paying Ozuna and Fried for one guy, and that's just kind of the nature of Ohtani. He's covering two positions in one, which makes him so valuable. So, of course, the risk of an investment in Ohtani if he can't pitch is really big. But again, as many have already made the point, he's one of the five best hitters in baseball, even if he's not pitching. If you move him to a corner outfield spot, the Braves could potentially move him to left field by that point, and he's still, a 7 or 8 WAR player in left field, and brings huge money to the Braves fan base to from Japan and from elsewhere. So the value is still very much there. So I think a scenario exists, right? That's the whole point of me doing this episode, right? I think a scenario exists where Ohtani could be a Brave. Ohtani's camp and the Braves are both very tight-lipped about contract discussions. So if it happens, it'll probably just happen suddenly out of nowhere, and we'll all be dancing in the streets if it happens. It's definitely fun to talk about. Um, if I'm right in how he's evaluating teams, then the Braves have a great shot. I could be totally wrong. Okay, I could be just dreaming and barking up a wrong tree, and maybe so. And we'll see Ohtani in Yankee pinstripes or in Dodger blue, and kind of it's all the same of what most top free agents, where most top free agents end up. But I think Ohtani is a little bit of a different guy. And with that, I think he might end up somewhere that most people don't foresee. So maybe that's Atlanta, maybe it's somewhere else, but it is just incredibly interesting. Ohtani's free agency is just really interesting to watch. So we will continue to watch it, guys. I appreciate you tuning in for another episode of State of the Braves, and I'll talk to you soon.